We're now online with Michel DE BAAR, Executive Director, Global Development and Licensing of MSD. Hi, Michel, can you hear me?
Hello, good afternoon. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me as well?
Yes, very well. Thank you to be with us this afternoon. I just remind all the participants and people connected on internet that they can ask their questions through the bottom line of the screen, the Q&R line. All these questions will go to my tablet here, and I will ask them to you, Michel, at the end of your presentation. But now we're going to listen to you, and you're going to tell us about a public-private success story.
Thank you so much, Fabrice. And indeed, I'm going to talk today about public-private partnerships at MSD. And I'm going to present you a couple of different examples as well of partnerships within MSD. So first of all, for those people that are maybe not so familiar with MSD as an organization, we're also known as Merck in the United States and Canada, and we have a global operations with about 71,000 people working worldwide. Other than our company with the same name in Germany, we are focused solely on pharmaceuticals, including on vaccines, biologicals, and next to human health, we also have an animal health division. What's important to realize is we had last year revenues of close to $50 billion, but we invested 28% of those back into our research and development activities. And just to give you an idea on those type of revenues, those are not revenues that we generate all through innovation that comes solely from our internal research. Majority of it, even 60 to 65% of our revenues comes from products that are developed due to alliances and acquisitions of different products from different companies, research institutes and academic institutes throughout the world. Just to give you a couple of examples here, for example, Keytruda was invented in the Netherlands in oncology, big name these days. Gardasil, our HPV vaccine, was originated from Australia. And then we have different medicines here listed from the UK, from Japan and from the USA. The technology is a little difficult to manage the slides, but I'll try to. One of the examples I'd like to go a little bit in more depth is on Ervebo, which is our Ebola vaccine, which has developed due to the fact that it was a huge public-private partnership. I'll show you in a couple of slides more details on that. And the overarching aim of setting up partnerships like that, instead of doing everything in-house, was to have as quickly as possible this vaccine development up to licensure. To give you a little bit of an idea on the last decades of Ebola, most of you will probably remember that about 5-6 years ago, we had the largest outbreak of Ebola in history, and mainly in the 3 different countries in West Africa. And that was followed also in 2018 and 2020 with additional outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC. What's actually more striking, and most of you have probably picked this up, is that at this moment there's ongoing outbreaks, both in the DRC as well as Guinea. And in this case, the intriguing part most probably is that both have been confirmed that the origin of the Ebola in this case was not from the animal reservoir, but was from the human reservoir. So these were survivors of Ebola from about 5 years ago that actually 5 years later have transmitted Ebola to some of to their sexual partners in this case. So it's very important in this case to develop Ebola because it's a very deadly disease, and we were very fortunate to be able to have a very broad partnership of all different type of governmental and non-governmental organizations, helping us truly to accelerate the vaccine development and making sure that it gets in the right place at the right time. You can see here a list of different agencies and organizations, especially a lot of African governments, but also researchers in the continent, as well as a lot of volunteers, of course, helped us with the development. The governments of Canada, especially, and the United States and Europe played an important role in the initial initiation of the early phase studies, as well as support in terms of financing, in terms of the infrastructure. Then, of course, field responses, service organizations, for example, like MSF, a very important part because they were on the spot in the field. Global public health organizations, universities throughout the world, which had all different capabilities that they brought towards the development path, and of course the organizations from MSD and New Link Genetics, where really the vaccine originated in after having been developed in the Public Health Agency of Canada, and it was supported by extremely responsible regulatory agencies across the globe, which I will go into a little bit more detail as well. This is a fairly busy slide, I realize that, but it just gives you a little bit of an idea on the timeline of the development of this vaccine. Started already back in the 80s, previous century, where already the VSV backbone was developed to put in some of the antigens from Ebola and start as a vaccine candidate. And ultimately in 2014, the whole vaccine development was really sped up after in the beginning of 2014, the WHO had declared an emergency outbreak of Ebola. And then by mid-2014, the first trials were started with the candidate of the VSV vaccine with the Ebola antigens. And in this case, it took only 5 years to get it up to licensure and approval at various regulatory authorities. And just to put it in a context, most of the vaccines that we are developing have a time span between 10 and sometimes even up to 15 years for that clinical development path. So this was a truly remarkable fast program. That also means that there were measures in place that, for example, helped us with the accelerated approval through pre-qualification by the WHO, for example, but also rolling reviews by the European Medicine Agency in Europe and the USA, the FDA, together with the national regulatory authorities in the different African countries that we worked with. And just to give you an idea on the timelines, in the bottom part here of the slide, you see, for example, that the EMA provided conditional marketing approval in late 2019, immediately almost followed by licensure by the FDA. And that was all based on pre-qualification by the WHO as well, which helped us rolling out the vaccine very quickly in endemic area under the EMA conditional approval still as a clinical trial, but very soon we got to full marketing authorization at the beginning of the year, and that resulted in the licensure of the vaccine, currently in 8 different countries in Africa since February this year. Within this partnership, there were many successes, and what you can imagine, that such a large consortium of partners that are all dedicated to developing a vaccine is a very remarkable success, that everybody stayed on together, that everybody was engaged, really going for the success basically, and making sure that the vaccine was developed. So basically assembling the consortium, managing the consortium, engaging the consortium was a success in itself, and that was truly driven by the medical and the social need for getting a vaccine to the market. Through the consortium, of course, there was a lot of access to expert labs, expert people throughout the world who all wanted to contribute through their capabilities to the success of the vaccine. And what's a very important part, and probably somewhat emphasized, that it's not just the clinical development that's very important, that it's moving fast, but especially getting the manufacturing right, getting those first batches ready at the site in time to be able to administer. And other activities as well, of course, like regulatory, but also getting all the protocols in place, the monitoring in place. So really getting those clinical sites up and running was a truly remarkable success in this case. As I mentioned already, it was a collaboration also with many different regulatory authorities, and also pointed out how the 5-year timeline compares to other vaccine development programs. So in this case, I think as the last part is the success is that there's now also a central stockpile of the product present, so it can be immediately distributed where there's a need at this moment. And we have seen that as well with the 2 recent outbreaks, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. But in addition to all the successes, there were, of course, also a lot of challenges. Ebola, very highly contagious virus. If you work with a live virus, you require biosafety level 4 laboratories, which are quite rare throughout the world. So that also affects, of course, that exporting of samples from Africa, for example, to the United States required very often that it would be irradiated because it would be too dangerous to just put it in a plane on dry ice, for example. So there were a lot of innovative inventions basically to get all these laboratories engaged and making sure that the right materials and the right samples ended up in the right laboratories. What's also a challenge was that between the many different clinical trials that were set up in the different countries and different populations, we try to get to uniformity and consistency of the data to be able to combine the data sets to measure for safety and efficacy. And I think this might resonate very strongly because at the moment with all the vaccines in development on COVID with the many different trials, it's sometimes very challenging to combine data sets and get to the right safety and efficacy assessments. I mentioned already the manufacturing, the stage manufacturing. It was a challenge by itself, but luckily we found ways out. And what was also a challenge is, of course, keeping everybody aligned and engaged during the development of the vaccine, both in the first big pandemic, but later also in the outbreaks in 2016 and 2018. And what is a challenge ongoing is that despite more than a year already after WHO pre-qualification, almost a year and a half even, there's still a lot of countries who haven't approved the vaccine, which is making it challenging to supply the vaccine if there would be a need because of an outbreak in one of those countries. Besides these challenges, there were many more. I will not go into detail about it. Basically, this was an example of a very large public-private partnership in MSD, and I would like to use a few more minutes and slides as well to present you some smaller consortia, but also public-private partnerships. And this is specifically an example from France around a program which we call MSD Avenir. And MSD Avenir is a program that started back in 2015. It is basically a research fund for life sciences set up by MSD France specifically with the overall mission to improve patients' lives through research and innovation. The first part of the endowment fund, in this case, which was a dedicated fund for health research in Europe, the first for MSD in its way as it is, was 75 million euros, and it was spent in the first 3 years of the fund's existence, and still is ongoing with some of the research that was funded for a couple of years. And we were very, very pleased to hear at the beginning of this year that the fund will be extended with another 42 million. With another 42 million for the next period of 3 years again. It's an innovative model in total. It is an example of a public-private partnership, very locally set up. And the main elements where we're looking at for successful products is that the products have to have a very high value in science. And we very strongly encourage that there's interdisciplinarity between the different researchers and the different areas of research. The first fund of 75 million could support 61 projects in total, 173 researchers. There's been an enormous amount of output in terms of publications, more than 180 already and counting. And at this stage and at this moment, there's been 8 patents filed. So it's a truly productive fund in its origin, and we hope to continue like that as well. And then to link that back into the immunology and inflammation, which is the theme of the Hybridays, here are a few examples of the projects that fall under that category. A couple of projects in the space of type 2 diabetes. Some are more focused on the endocrine system, some are more focused on understanding the restoration of the loss of beta cell mass, so to produce the insulin again, and some of them are, for example, more related into understanding the genetic background of rare autoimmune and inflammatory diseases and see if there's a causative link between genetics and outcome. As a last example, I would like to also point you to something that most big pharmas have, that are investigator-initiated studies. And in this case, on the website, which is listed here, engagezone.msd.com, you can find all the current topics where MSD is actively looking for programs to support through investigator-initiated studies. This site frequently is updated with the current programs that are supported, so I can always recommend, if you are looking for funding for your program, please look at these sites as well. And as mentioned, most of the big pharmas have something similar set up, so I can always recommend to look at other pharmaceutical company websites as well. And if you're not in the United States, which probably most of the listeners aren't, then please contact your local country representative. So my last slide, I would like to conclude, if I come back, yes, with one key takeaway. Basically what we can learn and what we've learned from the Ervibo story is that public-private partnerships can result in very high quality and high-speed development of medical product candidates through the leveraging of the different areas of expertise and capabilities from different researchers, different organizations, regulators, governments, and especially also non-governmental organizations. With that, I'd like to thank you, everybody, for your time and listening to me. And I'd like to thank also the organization for giving me the chance to present our story.
Thank you very much, Michel DE BAAR, for this presentation. It was really exciting and really important to focus on your success, or what could be, what is already a great public-private success with this quest for a vaccine against a deadly virus like Ebola. And we see now, by trying to vaccinate everyone with a vaccine for the COVID-19 or the SARS-CoV-2 virus, how difficult it can be. So we can imagine that this quest for a deadly virus, much more serious if we take into account people who die from the disease, for Ebola, how it's important. And it was very interesting too when you told us about your program MSD Avenir. So we can see that it's a great fund, 42 million euros more for the next 3 years. So we can all understand the interest to be connected with you and to try to work with you. But according to you, what's the specificity of a great collaboration between public and private, and what are the main assets to succeed in that?
That's a good question. There's a lot of factors, of course, contributing to success. I think that one of the most important parts which I have learned over the years, and not necessarily at MSD or from this Ervibo project, is that when you have many different parties at the table, everybody has a different agenda, so to say. Everybody has a mindset of what would we like to get out of this project by contributing. And I think it is extremely important from the very first moment to understand really what is the agenda of each of the partners on the call. I'm sorry, I have a parrot at home, so he's whistling on the background. You probably hear that. So it's very important.
It's live.
Okay. Yes, it is live indeed. Therefore, you can see it is live. So it's very important to really realize what are each other's of each of the different parties' goals of the partnership. What would we like to get out of it? And especially also if there's overlapping capabilities, who will be finally responsible for what? Because ultimately a lot of people within a partnership, of course, would like to do and contribute as much as possible. So understanding that through proper kickoff probably, and hopefully soon in person again, is, I think, a very important factor for success.
Okay, so now if we want to go further and try to work with you, how to contact you, because MSD is a huge company, so many people, you could help us maybe?
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think a very good starting resource is, of course, the website. We have a dedicated website for France, which is www.msd-france.com. I've checked it myself, and I saw that also on the homepage and the front page already is a link directly to the MSD Avenir program. So if you are interested in that specifically, I would absolutely recommend primarily to go there. And secondary, we are present at many different scientific conferences, at business partnering conferences, Also through the MSD.com website, you can always reach out to people in the licensing field, for example, like myself. So there's numerous ways that you can get in contact. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Michel DE BAAR, for your participation. Thanks a lot.